Throughout the history of existence of MMA, quite a few significant events, called confrontations and clashes took place, the ones that sometimes became something personal, and because of that their scale only increased. But there were also fights that became not just cult, but truly crucial and fundamental. These fights made the MMA industry exactly as we know it. So today I present to you the most important fights that changed the course of the history and which I ranked according to their importance in my humble opinion. In 2007-08, the hype around the street fighter Kimbo Slice gained huge momentum. The guy from the street burst into pro fights and having a 3-0 record went like a road roller upon the elite extreme combat organization. He was predicted a championship belt and a fight with Fedor, but before that he had to fight with an unfading veteran Ken Shamrock, who by that time was already 46. A few hours before the fight, Shamrock was injured during a warm-up, and the organizers had no choice but to look for an urgent replacement. They had three candidates: Frank Shamrock, Seth Petruzelli and Aaron Rossa. Kimbo immediately refused the fight with Frank, and then this opportunity was given to Seth, and Slice was paid extra for the fight on such a short notice, and his fee was $500,000.
And it's about to get serious. Slice quickly across. Slice goes down. Slice in trouble. Oh my goodness. Slice gets pounded out. And they stop it. Rocky is here.
Kimbo in the first attack ran into a non-coming jab that Seth dropped, and then finished off Slice with a series of punches. Only 14 seconds and the hype train went downhill due to the efforts of Seth Petruzelli, who was booed by the audience who came to see Kimbo but saw such a quick and unexpected upset. With this crazy knockout, Seth closed the whole promotion of Elite XC, which was leaning on the shoulders of Kimbo, who literally sold broadcasts alone, and this defeat broke the whole system. After this defeat, Slice went to the show The Ultimate Fighter, and the promotion, having held another event, declared bankruptcy. So maybe this fight was not as fateful as the next four on the list, but it's also not superfluous here, since this defeat closed the whole organization that initially showed great promise. After the achievements of Rickson in Japan and Hoist in UFC, the Gracie clan confidently took the top of the food chain and dictated their terms to Pride. Meanwhile, in Japan, they were working hard on the invention of a super soldier who was instilled with qualities that neutralized the strengths of the clan: creative thinking, samurai heart and icy composure. So, on November 21st, 1999, the Universal Soldier Kazushi Sakuraba set off for his legendary Gracie hunt. Sakuraba beat Rickson's and Hoist's cousin Hoyler, one of the most technical Gracies. This fight was supposed to end with a fracture, but the referee stopped the Japanese, which angered the Gracie clan, who didn't want to accept such a defeat since they believed that until Hoyler tapped, he hadn't lost. But it was too late, the battle was lost and the Gracie termination program was activated. Kazushi challenged Rickson, but he refused that battle, and Hoist Gracie, the most titled of Gracies, who hadn't had a fight for about 5 years, had to take the rap for Rickson. The fight took place according to special rules that were insisted on by Gracie. There was no time limit, just an infinite number of 15-minute rounds. At the same time, so that Hoist didn't repeat Hoyler's fate, the referee had no right to interfere the fight, only surrender, unconscious or throwing in the towel. Sakuraba went very epic into battle, surrounded by twins, and when he took off the mask, the audience simply burst into applause, as the Japanese later admitted that after such an entry, the only thing he thought about was how not to screw it up quickly. Hoist started the fight very aggressively, trying to drag the Japanese down to canvas, but Saku got to his feet every time and defended well. Sakuraba avoided fighting fresh Gracie and seemed to have a plan to stick to. And in some moments, the Japanese behaved so calmly and relaxed that it seemed as if he wasn't fighting one of the best fighters of that time, but walking him down the park. At the end of the first segment, Saku got to the knee bar and could have finished Hoist, but the gong saved Gracie's reputation. In the second round, a combat stand-up comedy from Sakuraba began, who seemed to have decided to play the Pride anthem on Gracie's nerves. Being squeezed into a corner, Saku, just for fun, began to undress Hoist and try to block his view with his own gi, and to pull off the belt with his pants. So this round was a real test of anger control for Gracie, who so far couldn't get the Japanese to wrestle. At the end of the third segment, Hoist himself was already falling on his back, carving Sakuraba's leg and trying to attack on his back, but in response he felt under Sakuraba therapy, from the view of which one Brazilian phenomena burst into tears. Well, when Gracie got to his feet, even tougher lows from the Japanese flew in, while every 15 minutes was given to him more and more difficult and his gas tank was running out. With each segment, Sakuraba improved, and in the fifth round for Hoist the difficulty indicator turned red and the quest was becoming more and more difficult. At the same time, the courageous Japanese, in addition to beating Gracie, didn't forget about the audience, performing all sorts of funny tricks by the applause. For Hoist, this fundamental decision to go to the fight in gi was simply a failure, since Sakuraba was able to turn even this aspect to his advantage and use Gracie's spacesuit against himself. In the sixth round, the number of low kicks per square grew exponentially, and with this Sakuraba drove Hoist into a dead end. On the ground, Gracie couldn't do anything and received low kicks, and in the standing position he received low kicks and couldn't do anything, since Sakuraba's striking was much higher level. It was a check and checkmate from the Japanese, and it looks like Elliot Gracie understood everything. During the break for the seventh segment, the Gracie team, after consulting, threw in the towel, and the stadium exploded with ovation. At this moment, Saku became a national hero, who in front of the entire Japan fought for an hour and a half with one of the best fighters of that era and managed to accomplish the seemingly impossible. The Japanese proved that Gracie can be hit and even beaten according to their own rules, so the myth about the invincible Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was dispelled, and Saku fought for another 15 minutes with Igor Vovchanchyn for the right to reach the Grand Prix finals that evening. But after the first round, his corner threw out the towel and Igor became the finalist.
Декабрь 1997 года. И новый чемпион Рэнди Кутур.
By the 1999, UFC was left without a heavyweight champion, as Randy Couture had an argument with the management and left for Japan, leaving the belt vacant. The organizers decided to hold a small Grand Prix of 4 fighters and find out the best one who would become the champion. The first finalist of the tournament was Bas Rutten, whose appearance was announced as the arrival of the strongest martial arts master in the world. At that time, Bas, who had fought his entire career in Pancrase, hadn't lost for 4 years, and in the semi-finals he cleaned out Tsuyoshi Kasaka. The second finalist was Kevin Randleman, and as he said before the fight, he and Bas had an agreement. They decided to fight in a stance, but on the condition that Bas wouldn't kick.
Титульный бой в тяжелом весе. Готовы? Вы готовы? Понеслось.
Get over here!
Bas immediately broke his promise and with the first blow tried to tear Kevin's head off, thereby booking himself a ticket to business class on Monster Airlines. But instead of fish or meat, something hot awaited him, namely a broken nose from the evil captain. So it was very difficult for Bas, but he was too tough to give up because of a broken nose, and in spite of all the inconveniences of this flight, Rutten bravely endured the terrible turbulence. The first half of the battle was completely left to Kevin, who was still fresh, was taking Bas down, and there controlling let his GNP off the leash. Over time, Kevin's activity dropped, although he exploded from time to time, but Bas was increasingly striking punches on his back and even tried to submit. That evening there was a real bloodbath in the octagon, and John McCarthy had to stop the fight more than once or twice so that the doctors would bring Rutten's face into a barely nice lock.
База Руттена.
In this difficult for all fight, unexpectedly for many, Bas Rutten won a split decision, and Kevin in his corner considered it a complete bullshit. The whole army of fans around the world considered it to be this. They still think the same way. This controversial result, together with all the prohibitions and problems that Senator John McCain created, prompted the creation of a whole set of rules and criteria for referees and judges, which were established on the next tournament. Since before this fight, the judges evaluated the fight by some general impression and not according to any rules, and apparently Kevin's takedowns and control time weren't really taken into account. So this controversial decision was the catalyst for a huge step for ultimate fighting to a sport called MMA. Well, you guys post what you think about this decision. On whose side is the majority, Bas or Kevin? By 2005, UFC had lost $35 million and the organization was on the edge of bankruptcy. Then Dana White and the Fertitta brothers went all in and put everything on black. The Ultimate Fighter show that was supposed to either kill or bring this war Titanic back to life. Before the show, the Fertitta brothers went even deeper into red in order to run a good advertising campaign. In addition to all these complications, none of the leading TV channels agreed to broadcast it, except for Spike TV, on conditions that Fertittas would cover the production costs of $10 million. The first season was mentored by Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture, who were supposed to fight each other at the end of the show, but the show's final bout between Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar overshadowed the battle of two legends. In the first round, Griffin acted as the aggressor, who took the center of the octagon and punched out exact combinations. But by the middle of the segment, Stephan swayed and the fight gradually turned into an uncompromising chop in the center of the cage. And people began to get up from their seats, realizing that this would be something special. After the blood was spilled, a big mess and disorder began. Brutal exchanges in the center of the cage gave way to massacres in the tie clinch, and in this bustle, it was very difficult to make out who was leading. Many spectators in the hall began to call their friends and tell them to urgently switch to a spike, where two unknown barbarians arranged a real meat grinder that mustn't be missed. In such an energy-consuming battle, it's not surprising that by the end of the second round, the fighters had almost no powers left, but the charge and atmosphere that was transmitted from the audience didn't imply anything but war, and it continued. So, after 3 rounds of this battle, the judges were in the most difficult position, who needed to make some kind of decision, and it wasn't easy to make it. Forrest took the victory by unanimous decision and won the first TUF show, getting a contract with UFC, Toyota and a watch. But not everyone in the audience agreed with this verdict, since the fight turned out to be really close. Dana White, overjoyed that the show was a success, gave Bonnar the contract as well, and after all the ceremonies, both handsome men were taken to a local hospital. Stephan's wife and Forrest's friend brought them beer and junk food to have a party in the doctor's office. After this fight, they became best friends and Stephan named his son by the double name Griffin Brandon, in honor of his friend Forrest Griffin and his wife's passed away brother Brandon. The duel of Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar entered the UFC Hall of Fame and is considered the most important in the history of organization. After the fight that exact evening, UFC agreed with Spike TV to renew the contract, and the organization began to bloom, gain weight and popularity. All thanks to two guys, the former police officer Forrest Griffin, who later became the champion of UFC, and sports doctor Stephan Bonnar. 1994, Rickson Gracie wins the Vale Tudo tournament in Japan. His complete dominance and the success of his brother Royce in the UFC made Japanese fans doubt whether local pro wrestlers, led by Takada, were as good as they positioned themselves. The wrestlers tried to bribe Rickson by offering money to fight in a scripted fight, but were rejected. Then they decided to provoke Gracie by sending Yoji Andro to him at the hall, who was supposed to challenge him and fight right there. By design, Gracie would refuse, as the surprise effect will play. For this he will receive a black mark of a coward, which can only be washed off in a battle. But the plan scattered like Andrew's teeth across the Gracie Hall. Rickson beat the Japanese in front of the journalist and said hello to Takada. Over time, the passion subsided, but Rickson's scalp became even more desirable for fans of Japanese pro wrestling, who believed that Takada simply had to strike back and avenge Andrew. In 1997, Takada achieved his goal, and with the support of Hiroshi Mimimose, who had connections with the Yakuza, he organized a duel against Rickson, and for this, a whole promotion was created which was called Pride. According to rumors, Rickson was paid $1 million and Takada 5 times less. The excitement subsided a little since 2 years have passed since the conflict, but despite this, more than 47,000 Japanese people remembered that Takada and Rickson had unfinished business and came to the arena to support their idol. The gong rings and Takada gets on his bicycle. This is how the most anticipated battle in Japan began. Takada has thrown occasional punches and then again rides around the hood. But all this was for the time being, until Gracie transferred the Japanese to the ground and took full mount. Now the only question was how Rickson would end the fight. Beat the guy with punches or hold a submission.
He's got it. He's got it. Takada's got the hands locked. Takada taps out.
Rickson's choice fell on the armbar. The 5th minute and the fight is over, at the same time with no chance for Takada. The fight itself turned out to be quite ordinary, without any special sparks or intrigue, but thanks to stubborn Takada and Rickson, pride was formed, and in the future the Japanese were able to develop it to the largest promotion in the world, which is remembered with warmth in the hearts to these days. And many consider it to be the coolest promotion in the history of MMA. UFC probably won't be that big, but this is my personal opinion that I do not impose on anyone. But you can write your own, it will be interesting to read. This list does not include all the fights that might have to be there, but as for me, I chose the most iconic in terms of history and evolution of MMA. If you have anything to add, write your battles in the comments. And if there are at least 5 more, then we will definitely make the second part. Support me with a like if you like the video, and who is not subscribed, subscribe and click on the bell to be in touch and not to miss new videos.